There's always been something unsettling about the goings-on at Coyote Pass, but this latest revelation about the Brown family takes things to another level entirely. What began as a dream of unity and prosperity has now unraveled into a tale of betrayal, deception, and financial manipulation so coldly calculated it could rival the plot of a courtroom thriller. The scheme that Kody and Robyn allegedly orchestrated wasn't born overnight. According to records, testimony, and the fragments of truth stitched together from various sources, it was the culmination of a 5-year plan designed to consolidate wealth and control at the expense of those who trusted them most. It was in essence a slow, deliberate operation, a paper trail turned into a weapon. What makes this story all the more shocking is the way it was wrapped in the language of family, faith, and unity. To the outside world, the Browns were simply a large plural family navigating modern life. Behind the scenes, however, a very different reality was quietly unfolding, one in which trust was not just betrayed, but strategically dismantled for personal gain. To understand how this betrayal took root, we must go back to the beginning, to when the family uprooted their lives and moved from Las Vegas to Flagstaff, Arizona. Back then, Coyote Pass wasn't just a parcel of land. It was a promise, Kody's grand vision of a unified future. He painted it as their collective legacy, a sprawling property beneath the vast Arizona sky where each wife would have her own home, yet all would remain bound together in a symbolic circle of eternal family harmony. It was a utopian vision that he sold with the enthusiasm of a showman. His wives, despite their doubts, bought into it. They left behind 4 comfortable homes in Las Vegas and the stability they had painstakingly built there, following their husband's vision of a better, holier life on the land that was meant to be their shared inheritance. At the heart of the family's finances lay a system they called the family pot, a shared fund into which every member contributed and from which every major expense was drawn. It wasn't just a method of managing money. It was the very foundation of their plural household. Mortgage payments, household bills, and property investments were all meant to flow through this communal account. For decades, it worked because it was based on trust, and no one embodied that trust more than Janelle. Level-headed and business-minded, she had long been one of the family's most reliable earners. Her contributions helped hold their chaotic structure together. So when Coyote Pass was purchased, it was under the assumption that, although different parcels were assigned to different family members, the land as a whole was a collective investment, one big family asset. But that dream began to fracture almost immediately. Maintaining multiple rental homes in Flagstaff while also paying taxes on undeveloped land quickly bled the family finances dry. Janelle, ever pragmatic, would have seen the storm coming. She would have raised concerns about looming tax deadlines and the growing financial strain. That's when, according to insiders, Kody stepped in with what seemed like a reassuring offer. "Don't worry about it, Janelle. We'll handle it." It sounded like a moment of leadership, the patriarch taking responsibility. In truth, that simple phrase may have been the first move in a carefully plotted financial chess game. By persuading Janelle to stop worrying about the taxes, to stop managing the payments herself, Kody and Robyn were setting the stage for something far more sinister. It was a subtle shift in control, one that would later be used to argue that Janelle had willingly stepped back from her ownership and financial responsibility. What appeared to be kindness was, in fact, the start of a calculated withdrawal of her power. For years, Kody and Robyn quietly paid the property taxes on Coyote Pass. On the surface, it looked like simple efficiency. They had the money, they made the payments. But over time, a disturbing pattern emerged. The payments weren't coming from the family's shared fund, nor from any joint trust or LLC that had previously managed family assets. Each tax bill was paid directly from Kody and Robyn's personal joint account. Public records stretching back several years show a consistent paper trail, payment after payment, always from the same source. To the casual observer, this might seem insignificant, but to anyone versed in property law, it's a red flag waving in the desert wind. What they were quietly building, piece by piece, was a legal argument known as adverse possession by ouster, an obscure but powerful mechanism that can, over time, transfer ownership from one co-owner to another. In simple terms, adverse possession allows someone who has continuously and exclusively maintained a property, paying taxes, handling upkeep, and acting as the sole owner, to petition a court to grant them full ownership, even if someone else's name is on the deed. When applied between co-owners, this is known as ouster. It's rare, complicated, and extremely difficult to prove, but not impossible. The key requirement is evidence of exclusive hostile possession. In legal terms, hostile doesn't mean violent or malicious. It means acting in direct opposition to the other owner's rights. And one of the strongest indicators of such hostility is the consistent, documented payment of all financial obligations, taxes, maintenance, and associated costs, without any contribution from the other party. Over several years, such a record can be used to argue that the non-paying co-owner effectively abandoned their share. According to this theory, Kody and Robyn were not simply paying bills, they were laying bricks in a fortress of documentation. Each cleared check was another stone in the wall of a future court case that would, they believed, leave them as the uncontested owners of the entire Coyote Pass property. Their lawyer, so the story goes, allegedly advised them to maintain a spotless financial record in their own names and to ensure that Janelle contributed nothing. If she offered, they were told to decline it. The goal was to create a flawless, uninterrupted chain of payments that would demonstrate exclusive financial possession. It was a legal time bomb ticking quietly beneath the surface of family life. Then came a revelation that changed everything. Mykelti, one of the Brown children, allegedly overheard a conversation at Kody and Robyn's home several years ago that put their motives into chilling perspective. She recounted that while visiting, she overheard a phone call on speaker between the couple and their lawyer. During the discussion, the lawyer's tone was said to be precise, almost clinical, as he outlined the plan. He reportedly instructed them to keep paying all taxes from their joint account and to refuse any contributions from Janelle. In a few more years, he allegedly said, your claim will be ironclad. For Mykelti, the realization was devastating. What she had dismissed as routine legal talk was, in fact, a blueprint for betrayal. She later recalled the look of calm satisfaction on her father's face and the quiet nod of agreement from Robyn. It was at that moment she understood that what was unfolding wasn't about protecting the family's land. It was about taking it. Public records appear to support at least part of this narrative. Tax documents from the Coconino County Assessor's Office show that year after year, the payments came exclusively from Kody and Robyn's account, roughly $16,000 to $17,000 annually. Over 5 consecutive years, this amounted to more than $80,000. For them, this wasn't just an expense. It was an investment in future ownership. And while Janelle was out on the land in her RV struggling with permits and utilities, still trying to bring her dream of a family homestead to life, Kody and Robyn were quietly strengthening the case that could one day be used to take it all away. Each payment, each receipt, each cleared check was another entry in a record designed to prove that Janelle had abandoned her interest. But every plan, no matter how meticulous, carries within it the seeds of its own undoing. The same paper trail that Kody and Robyn thought would secure their claim may instead become the evidence that destroys it. That's because adverse possession by ouster depends on one crucial assumption, that the other party, in this case Janelle, failed to pay through neglect or disinterest. If, however, it can be proven that she was intentionally misled into not contributing, the entire argument collapses. That's where Mykelti's testimony could become the turning point. Her recollection of that phone call, if ever entered into evidence, would completely change the narrative. Instead of proving Janelle's abandonment, those records would prove manipulation. Instead of showing neglect, they would show deceit. What Kody and Robyn saw as their legal insurance could easily be reinterpreted as the blueprint for a fraudulent scheme. Imagine for a moment the courtroom scene that could unfold. Their lawyer presents 5 years of meticulous records. Every payment accounted for, every receipt neatly aligned. Your Honor, he might declare, my clients have borne the full financial responsibility for this property. The defendant has not contributed a single penny. It is clear she has abandoned her share. On paper, the argument looks airtight. But then Janelle's counsel calls Mykelti to the stand. Under oath, she recounts the conversation she overheard. The lawyer's instructions, the deliberate refusal to accept Janelle's money, the plan to make the record appear one-sided. Suddenly, what looked like diligence becomes deception. What looked like ownership becomes entrapment. What looked like ownership becomes entrapment. When Robyn entered the picture, everything began to shift, not just emotionally, but financially. The family's balance of power quietly moved from shared responsibility to something far more centralized. Kody slowly stepped back from any semblance of a traditional job, declaring that he would instead manage the family brand, which conveniently became inseparable from Robyn's personal ventures, most notably the ill-fated jewelry business. That enterprise, by all accounts, was nothing more than a financial sinkhole. Yet it continued to drain the family's shared resources, funds that might have gone towards paying down mortgages in Las Vegas or setting aside savings for Coyote Pass. Instead, Those resources were funneled into a failing business that seemed to benefit one household far more than the others. When the family relocated to Flagstaff, this imbalance only deepened. They abandoned 4 affordable mortgages in favor of costly rentals and parcels of land they could scarcely afford to build upon. And who, one might ask, benefited most from this upheaval? Robyn, who found herself in a sprawling rental, and eventually in a lavish $1 million home jointly purchased with Kody. Meanwhile, Christine occupied a cramped house, and Janelle was reduced to living in a small apartment while dreaming of her RV. The purchase of Robyn's home marked a decisive turning point. Kody and Robyn framed it as a sound investment for the entire family, yet in truth, it drained much of the family's liquid capital, the very funds Christine and Janelle had expected to use to pay off the Coyote Pass land and begin building. From that moment onward, the communal pot, the so-called family fund, was effectively finished. It transformed into a private reserve controlled entirely by Kody and Robyn, directed solely toward their own priorities. Christine and Janelle were still expected to contribute financially, but their voices in how that money was spent were silenced. The so-called Coyote Pass tax scandal was the natural endpoint of this long process. Once the precedent had been set of using communal funds for personal benefit, the next logical step was to use personal accounts to seize communal property. It was the final stage of privatization, the complete conversion of the family's shared dream into a private real estate portfolio for one favored couple. This wasn't merely a betrayal of Janelle. It was a betrayal of the entire principle upon which the family had been built. The plural family ideal had been reduced to a monarchy, with a self-appointed king, a queen, and a handful of discarded tenants being pushed to the margins. Consider for a moment how easily the story could have unfolded differently. What if that one crucial phone call had not been overheard? What if a lawyer had not been placed on speakerphone that day? The plan, as it turns out, came terrifyingly close to succeeding. Had no one intervened, they might have waited another year or two until their adverse possession claim was beyond dispute. With several years of canceled checks from their personal account, their paper trail would have appeared flawless. They could then have quietly filed a legal claim asserting sole ownership of the land, blindsiding Janelle with court papers. In such a scenario, her case would have been devastatingly weak. When asked to produce proof of her contributions, she would have had nothing but her word, while they would present a mountain of documentation. She might have been forced into a humiliating settlement, accepting pennies on the pound to avoid a legal battle she was unlikely to win. In the worst case, a judge could have ruled in their favor entirely, erasing her rights to the land and leaving her with nothing but the dust of broken promises. The chilling reality is that this intricate, multi-year, $80,000 scheme was ultimately derailed by sheer accident, by the presence of a daughter overhearing a conversation from another room. It demonstrates how fragile justice can be, how perilously close they came to getting away with it all. The entire future of the family's legacy, it seems, hung on a single overheard sentence. Legally speaking, the land at Coyote Pass has now become a toxic asset, a monument to betrayal and deceit. It's nearly impossible to imagine a world where all the parties could ever build upon it together. The trust has not only been broken, it's been obliterated. Any future legal disputes regarding the property will undoubtedly be laced with resentment and accusation. Yet the deeper damage is not financial, it's familial. This alleged plot validates every grievance voiced by Christine and Janelle over the years. It confirms that they were not imagining their marginalization. They were being actively targeted. The pattern of exclusion was not emotional but deliberate, woven into a larger plan that placed personal gain above family unity. For the children of the original wives, the first 13, this revelation is devastating. To learn that their father and his favored wife may have been working to secure the family inheritance for themselves is a wound that may never heal. How could the next generation ever gather on that land, knowing it was nearly stolen from their mothers and siblings? This single betrayal reshapes the entire sister-wives story. What once seemed like the gradual collapse of a plural family now reads as a calculated takeover from within, a narrative of greed, manipulation, and the misuse of trust. Even the public rants that once appeared to be pure emotional volatility take on a new, sinister light when viewed through the lens of legal strategy. Kody's repeated declarations that he was the only one with a vision, or that he had made the real sacrifices, could easily have been part of a deliberate effort to establish a public record, a performance meant to suggest sole ownership. On camera, he appeared to be asserting dominance. In a courtroom, those very clips could have been framed as proof of an open and hostile claim. In essence, he was performing the ouster for the cameras, putting Janelle on notice in front of millions of witnesses. Even their refusal to develop the land might have been strategic. By keeping it undeveloped and unused, they prevented Janelle from establishing physical possession, a key legal factor that could have strengthened her claim. The endless delays, the endless excuses, the cost of water, the lack of unity, may have all served a hidden purpose, keeping her claim dormant, ready to be erased when the time was right. Ultimately, this is no longer a story of a family divided by emotion alone. It's the story of how a shared dream was methodically dismantled through greed and legal cunning. What was once a tale of plural marriage and domestic struggle has become a case study in power, betrayal, and the slow corrosion of trust. Kody and Robyn may have believed they were building their future. Instead, they constructed a monument to their own downfall, a tombstone for the Brown family's unity, engraved with their names on every check they wrote. It all began as a quiet legal maneuver, something that seemed almost routine at first. A conversation with a lawyer, a few notes on paper, and a plan that would eventually unravel the very fabric of a family, once held up as a symbol of unity and faith. According to accounts, the couple were advised to carefully document every interaction with Janelle that involved finances, to note down even the smallest comments she made about being short on money or struggling with expenses. It wasn't simple record-keeping. It was the creation of a character assassination file, built alongside a financial one. As Mykelti later recounted, the tone of the conversation had been chilling, not because it was angry or heated, but because of its calm, deliberate cruelty. It was a business meeting about financially dismantling a woman who had once been her mother in every sense but biology. Robyn, she recalled, had a notepad in hand, jotting things down like a dutiful student preparing for an exam, while Kody listened, nodded, and eventually, when the call ended, remarked with quiet satisfaction that the plan is in motion. That smug confidence, she said, was the part that haunted her most. Too intimidated and frightened to speak up at the time, she buried the memory for years until the family's very public collapse brought it all back to light. If such a plot were ever to be scrutinized in a real courtroom, the defense would be as manipulative as the scheme itself. They wouldn't confess. They would deny everything, claiming misunderstanding or misinterpretation. They would paint Mykelti as a confused or bitter family member, perhaps even suggesting that she had been influenced by her mother, Christine. The lawyer, they'd say, was merely discussing hypothetical contingencies. And in doing so, they would try to discredit their own daughter to save themselves. Their second line of defense would be to recast their payments as heroic sacrifice. They would claim that Janelle had failed to pay her fair share of the property costs, and that faced with possible foreclosure, they had stepped in selflessly to save the family's land. That $80,000 payment would be portrayed not as a calculated move, but as an act of financial bravery, proof of their loyalty, not their greed. Janelle, they'd argue, had been detached for years, distracted by her independence, her travels, and her closeness to Christine. They would frame her strength as selfishness, her autonomy as abandonment. In their retelling, she wouldn't have been pushed out. She would have, as they'd claim, walked away of her own accord. Such a defense might sound convincing on the surface, but it's brittle, easily shattered by years of televised contradictions. Any capable lawyer representing Janelle could use the family's own filmed words as evidence of a sustained pattern of emotional isolation and financial manipulation. And when viewed through that lens, the story becomes far darker. Not a family dispute, but a calculated betrayal. The consequences of such a plot would ripple far beyond Kody and Robyn themselves. Every child of the Brown family would be pulled into the storm, forced to choose sides in a conflict that shatters any illusion of unity. For Gwendolyn, who has built her own platform and perspective on her family's dysfunction, such a revelation would be both validating and devastating. To publicly accuse her father and his wife of conspiring against Janelle would mean confronting a painful truth she has long hinted at, that the favoritism and financial imbalance were not perception, but policy. Peyton, already outspoken in his criticism of his father, would likely respond with a mixture of fury and grim satisfaction, vindicated at last. He would go public, share anecdotes of inequity, and amplify the story across social media. Meanwhile, the children who have tried to stay neutral, Logan, Aspen, Hunter, would face a reckoning of their own. How does one remain impartial when presented with undeniable proof that one parent plotted to strip another of her future? The younger children, particularly those raised in Kody and Robyn's household, would face the cruelest truth of all, that the comfort they grew up in might have been paid for by their siblings' suffering. Such knowledge would leave scars, guilt, confusion, and the slow corrosion of familial trust. The land at Coyote Pass, once the physical symbol of the Brown family's dream of unity, becomes, in this story, a crime scene. The property's ownership was fragmented from the start, divided between multiple parties under different deeds. This disorganization, once seen as a quirk of plural marriage logistics, turned out to be the perfect foundation for exploitation. Kody and Robyn's alleged focus on Janelle's share was strategic. By isolating her portion, they could attempt to consolidate control. And that 80,000